Hi, good afternoon, everyone. So, welcome to Vision IAS and welcome to the analysis of paper 3 of General Studies that was asked in the mains examination 2022. And my name is Jatin. I'll be taking the discussion for the internal security section. This year, 4 questions were asked from the internal security, and I think that has become a general pattern as far as the mains examination is concerned. Every year, you will find that round about 50 marks questions are asked from internal security. Though one must keep it in mind that internal security is one topic if you pay attention to and if you are prepared properly, then you can not only get more marks in this particular section as compared to the other marks, because questions to a certain extent are predictable as far as internal security is there. And then the second is that you can save a considerable amount of time as well in writing answers to these questions, and you can use them in some of the other topics where questions are slightly unpredictable or where the nature of the question varies from year to year. So as far as this year's paper is concerned, I mean, there is absolutely no surprise as far as the internal security 50 marks questions have been asked. Every year what they're doing is that they're asking 2 questions which are 15 markers, and they have decided the question number as well. 19th and 20th and 9th and 10th will be questions which will be related to internal security every year. You know, this has become a consistent pattern over last few years now. Before I proceed to discuss about the questions that were asked in this year's examination and what are the sources that you could refer to prepare for such topics, as well as what was supposed to be written in those questions, but we should know about the syllabus of the internal security for UPSC paper 3. So primarily, if you look at the syllabus for the internal security, these are the topics which have been provided by the UPSC. The first one is linkages between development and spread of extremism, and you need to understand how development relates to extremism, how both of them can have a causal relationship, cause and effect kind of a relationship with each other. And also under this topic, we need to prepare some of the topics such as Naxalism, Maoism essentially, and insurgency in the Northeast as well, and as well as of course militancy in Kashmir. So these are 3 major themes which run through the entire syllabus of internal security anyway, and these are 3 major internal security threats that India faces, so we need to prepare them properly. So this year also there is one question that has been asked on left-wing extremism from this particular topic, that is linkages between development and spread of extremism. And every year you will find inevitably 1 or 2 questions are asked from this particular topic. This year it was a question on Naxalism, last year it was on insurgency in Northeast, then a year before it was again a question on Naxalism. So you will find 1 or 2 questions every year related to these 2 topics, which are really, really important. And the best part is that these questions don't necessarily vary in terms of the content which is expected of you. It's just that they keep varying in terms of the approach which is required in writing the answer. The content largely remains to be the same. The sources largely remain to be the same, but just that the approach for writing the answers vary. The second topic which has been given in the syllabus is role of state and non-state actors. So as a part of this particular the topic of the syllabus, you need to prepare about the insurgency movement, you need to prepare about Naxalism, you need to prepare about terrorism and international terrorism, you need to focus on smuggling, human trafficking, various other organized crimes that exist in the society. And communalism could also be one of the things to discuss here. It could also be about how some of the non governmental organizations, some of the NGOs also are involved in causing threat to India's internal security. So those kind of topics are supposed to be covered as a part of this particular topic. Then challenges to internal security through communication networks, role of media and social media networking sites in internal security challenges, and basics of cyber security. All 3 of them are supposed to be studied together, and largely the source for preparation of this topic is the newspapers, apart from some basic text which I will tell you. But in this, what we need to cover is, what do you understand by cyber security, what are the various elements or components of cyber security, what are some of the threats that exist to India's cyber security, We should also be knowing what is the state of cybersecurity in India, what all steps have been taken by us in order to overcome cybersecurity challenges, what more needs to be done. Internationally, is there any convention which is there in place? So all those things have to be prepared as a part of this topic. Then we have the topic of money laundering and its prevention. Also, by the way, this topic has become really, really important in the exam, because considering the significance of cyber security and data protection, etc., every year you will find one question from this topic. एक क्वेश्चन तो आना ही आना है साइबर सिक्योरिटी से या सोशल मीडिया से या मीडिया से, पक्का 101% एक क्वेश्चन आता है. देन द टॉपिक ऑफ मनी लॉन्ड्रिंग एंड इट्स प्रिवेंशन एज वेल. सो व्हाट डू यू अंडरस्टैंड बाय मनी लॉन्ड्रिंग? What are the various stages in the process of money laundering? What are the ways to overcome money laundering? What are some of the laws that have been enacted in India for overcoming money laundering? Then what are the ill effects of money laundering in the economy, on the society, on the politics of the country? Those are some of the things which we need to cover as a part of it. Then security challenges and their mandate in the border and the management in the border areas. So this is also one topic which has become really, really important for the last few years in the civil service examination. There either be a question on the land border security or land border management, or border issues with the other countries and their impact on the various internal security issues of India. They may ask you a question related to maritime security, as they have done it this year. In fact, for last few years, we were expecting a question on maritime security. And that's what we had been discussing as well with the student. But this year, they inevitably ended up asking a question on maritime security as well. Then on top of that, the topic of linkages of organized crime with terrorism. So what do you understand by organized crime? What are the types of organized crimes? What are the linkages that exist between organized criminal groups and terrorist groups? Why it is such a concern for the security agencies? What steps have been taken in order to overcome the linkages between organized criminal groups and terrorist groups? What are the reasons because of which organized criminal groups and terror groups are coming close to each other? So these are some of the other dimensions that we need to touch upon in this particular topic. And then various security agencies and their mandate. Now, even though interestingly UPSC has asked very few questions on this topic, I remember in 2019, they asked a question on the changes made to the NIA Act and the UAPA Act and how that has changed the functioning of the security agencies in the country. But this topic is something which is unexplored. They haven't asked questions on this topic. So potentially, if I were to tell you, there are a lot of questions that are waiting to be asked in the exam, because UPSC has still not touched several topics in the way it should be. So one learning that you can have from this year's examination is that maritime security, no question had been asked for almost 6-7 years as far as internal security is concerned. And suddenly this year, they asked one question. So a lot of candidates were unprepared for the topic of maritime security. So the advice that I would give to you on the basis of this year's paper analysis is that you should not miss out on those topics which have not been asked in the exam previously, because the chances of questions getting asked from those topics has gone up many-fold this year. So what I want to say is, first and foremost, out of these topics, which were the topics which are covered this year? So topics which are covered this year was this was, of course, the basics of cyber security, organized crime with terrorism, and related to maritime security. But these are the topics were not covered. So for next year, automatically, apart from the questions that have been asked previously by UPSC, these topics also become very important. So security agencies and their mandate, you don't need to necessarily study what exactly is the basis for the formation of BSF and CRPF and the CISF and the ITBP, etc. You don't need to go into the detailed history of these organizations. But more importantly, you should know the issues associated with the functioning of the Central Armed Police Forces. You should know issues associated with the functioning of the police agencies in India. You should understand what are the challenges associated with the modernization of the defense forces in the country. Right? Those are the kind of topics that you need to focus on. Don't focus on factual information. UPSC is not bothered about whether you know the facts or not. What they are more bothered about is whether you know the analysis of those facts, whether you know the analysis of the prevalent situation, whether you know what are the issues that are facing the security agencies in India and how do we overcome them. So the point I'm trying to make is that UPSC in general
is more focused on issues, more focused on reforms, and not necessarily on the facts as such, right? So other topics are equally important, in fact more important in my opinion for the coming years, because for example money laundering, UPSC in its history of this present syllabus of last 10 years has asked only 2 questions related to money laundering. Related to organized crime, only 3 questions have been asked in the mains examination. Related to border management as well, there are only 3-4 questions that have been asked. So there are a lot of themes which have still not been explored by UPSC, which you need to pay attention to. Right? So that's the basic idea which I wanted to give you about the syllabus. Of course, see, it's not possible for me to cover in the allotted time discussion on the questions as well as a detailed analysis of the syllabus of the examination as well. That can be a point for discussion sometime later. But broadly, I want to just introduce you to this idea that a number of topics which were untouched by UPSC earlier have been touched upon this year. Organized crime और terrorism की linkages पे UPSC ने direct question आज तक नहीं पूछा था, और इस बार उन्होंने वो पूछ लिया. They ended up asking that question and believe me, it was a very expected question. You know, अगर आप basic तैयारी कर रहे हैं internal security की, you have to understand what are the linkages that exist between organized crime and terrorism. Similarly, they had not asked a question on maritime security as well, except one odd question which had been asked in 2015, and that was also a very difficult question. Other than that, they have not asked a single question on maritime security. This year, they ended up asking that. So what we need to learn from that is that, one, pay attention to, of course, all those topics which have been asked previously in the exam, because themes are getting repeated in the exam, and I will show it to you. But not only that, but you also need to focus on those topics which have not been covered in the exam till now, because they are sitters, literally very simple questions which are being asked. मतलब जो ऑर्गेनाइज क्राइम और टेररिज्म पे इन्होंने सवाल पूछा है, वो अगर किसी ने भी बेसिक टेक्स्ट कवर किया हो, organized crime and linkages between terrorism, any person would be able to answer that question. Of course, what will make a difference in whether you get 6.5 out of 10 or whether you get 4 out of 10 will depend upon, one, how you have structured the answer, and secondly, how you have been able to draw some examples from the recent past to add to your answers. Okay, so that is the broad approach which we need to keep in mind. Now let's jump into exactly what were the questions that were asked this year. So first is the question that was asked, question number 20 this year, and that was with respect to the topic of Maoism and Naxalism. Now, as far as this particular topic is concerned, what are some of the sources that you can refer to? I mean, see, there are a lot of coaching institutes and their material, etc., and books and all of those things which are available in the market. But I would suggest that if you are genuinely wanting to prepare these particular topics on your own, especially, then some of the sources would be second ARC report. Second ARC report has a specific part of it dedicated to, there is a report called as the report on conflict resolution. Okay, so the report on conflict resolution, conflict management of the second ARC is specifically focusing on insurgency in Northeast as well as on Naxalism in India or left-wing extremism in India. So, of course, this is not a detailed analysis which has been provided in the report, but second ARC has touched upon this topic. I think it can be a good starter for you to read and understand the topic of Naxalism as well as the topic of insurgency in the Northeast, the second ARC report on conflict resolution. Then Ministry of Home Affairs publishes its annual report every year, in which they discuss about various internal security challenges facing India. So you may refer that Ministry of Home Affairs report as well. Apart from that, there are some reports of the department related standing committees. Where is one which you will find, इंटरनेट पे आप सर्च करेंगे तो आपको मिल जाएगा, है ना. एक डिपार्टमेंट रिलेटेड स्टैंडिंग कमेटी की रिपोर्ट है जो कि नॉर्थ ईस्ट के अंदर सिक्योरिटी सिचुएशन की बात कर रहा है, बहुत डिटेल में बात किया उसने. तो व्हाट आर द प्रॉब्लम्स विद रिस्पेक्ट टू द इंटरनल सिक्योरिटी इश्यूज इन नॉर्थ ईस्ट, इंसर्जेंसी, वेरियस ऑर्गेनाइजेशंस, व्हाट इज देयर डिमांड, व्हाट आर द रीजंस बिकॉज ऑफ विच the insurgency is prevalent in Northeast India, etc. So you can refer that report. Apart from that, if you want to read more about Naxalism specifically, there was a report of the Planning Commission, and this Planning Commission report was called as the D.K. Bandopadhyay Committee report. Okay, Bandopadhyay Committee. So this Bandopadhyay Committee This Bandyopadhyay committee had written a report, इसको the report of the expert group of planning commission भी कहते हैं, on the extremist challenges in the left-wing extremist affected areas. Developmental challenges, sorry, in the extremist affected areas was the title of the report, which was written by the expert group of planning commission. This report was published in the year 2007, but it is as relevant in order to understand the topic of Naxalism as it was that time, right? And then there are some select committee reports of the committees of the parliament as well on the internal security situation in Northeast, on the security situation in left-wing extremist affected areas, security situation in militancy in Kashmir. So you can read those reports. But of course, the problem with these reports is that they are very bulky. So you should know how to get the selected material out of these particular reports, right? Anyway, so that's as far as the sources and the strategy for the topic of left-wing extremism, etc. and all those things are concerned. Let's look at the question this year. Now, it's a very, very standard question. There is no surprise in this particular question. Question was a 250 words question, which had to be written in that designated time. The question was that Naxalism is a social, economic and developmental issue. So it is a social, there is a social dimension involved with it, there is an economic dimension involved with it, and there is a developmental problem associated that is resulted in a violent internal security threat. So as we know that Naxalism is one of the most significant violent internal security threats affecting the country. As early as 2005, Dr. Manmohan Singh had stated that left-wing extremism is the biggest internal security threat that India faces today. A lot of people were focused on militancy in Kashmir or insurgency in Nagaland, but we had forgotten that biggest threat that existed to India was Naxalism. And he was absolutely correct, because by the year 2009, almost 1/3 districts of India, that is almost 1/3 of India, was affected by Naxal violence in some or the other way. And this entire belt, which was affected by Naxalism, was called as the Red Corridor. It's termed as the Red Corridor, where the Naxalite or the left-wing extremist revolutionaries have been involved in violence against not only the state, but also against the civilians as well, including various heinous crimes such as extortion, kidnapping, killings, abductions, etc. and so on and so forth. So the question is that Naxalism is a social, economic and developmental issue that has manifested or that has resulted into an internal security threat, right? And then it says that in this context, because what is the origin of this problem? It says that discuss what are some of the emerging issues with respect to Naxalism in India today. What are some of the newer problems that Naxalism is posing today? And then suggest a multi-layered strategy to tackle the menace of Naxalism. Now see, this is a very standard question. Problems, causes for the rise of Naxalism. What are some of the newer problems that are emerging with respect to Naxalism? And what is a strategy that you would suggest for approaching Naxalism? Before I go into what all should have been there in your answers in terms of the content, let me show you that in the past itself, UPSC has asked multiple questions related to this particular theme. And they have just kept changing the words and the context in which they want the answer from you, but the basic content remains to be the same. For example, they asked a question a few years back that what are the determinants of left-wing extremism in eastern part of India? Same thing. What are the causes for the rise of left-wing extremism in eastern part of India? And what strategy should the government of India, civil administration and security forces adopt to counter the threat in affected areas? See, it is so similar to the question that has been asked this year, where they have simply asked you multi-layered approach बता दीजिए. Multi-layered को देखने के बहुत तरीके हैं, है ना? आप एक बोल सकते हैं that there should be some steps taken at national level. The next layer should be the state level. The third layer should be the district level. The fourth layer should be the local level or something like that. Multi-layered को देखने का एक और तरीका है that some steps should be taken at the national level, where all the states and the center come together on various policy issues, that what should be our overall policy to deal with Naxalism. Not just that, but even at the level of the security forces, what should be our approach. Then again, you may look at it that at the state level, how the states need to coordinate with each other. especially on the developmental front, in order to address the problems of Naxalism. So whichever way you look at it, ultimately UPSC is asking the same thing बार बार घुमा घुमा के, ठीक है, और कुछ नहीं है. There is absolutely no difference in this particular topic. Similarly, if you look at some of the other questions also that have been asked in the past, Indian government recently, no, not this one, sorry. Left-wing extremism is showing a downward trend, but still affects many parts of the country. Briefly explain the government of India's approach to counter the challenges posed by LWE. Again, the content primarily remains to be the same. Then there was another question. So this is related to insurgency and all. I don't have that question, but there was another question that was asked that with the problem of Naxalism has been largely caused due to the displacement issues, etc., with Naxalbari and some of the places such as Malkangiri as focus. So discuss the strategy that should be taken into account for dealing with Naxalism. 2013, they asked a question. Analyze the impact of non-implementation of the provisions of Article 244, which basically relates to scheduled areas and their administration. Analyze the impact of non-implementation of the provisions of Schedule 5 of the Indian Constitution on the rise of Naxalism in India. So they are discussing one specific cause and how that has led to rise of Naxalism in India. Question and the theme remains to be largely the same year after year after year as far as Naxalism is concerned. Now let's come back to this year's question. This year's question is that Naxalism is a social, economic and developmental issue manifesting as a violent internal security threat. In this context, you have to discuss about the emerging issues, etc. So see, first and foremost, in your introduction of the answer itself, you should try and in your introduction of the answer itself, you should try and write about the causes of the rise of Naxalism. I'll tell you the reason for that. It's a 250 words answer. Already they are asking you two things. One, they are asking you emerging issues. Okay, so one thing which has been asked by UPSC in this year's examination is the emerging issues with respect to Naxalism. So even if you write about 3 or 4 emerging issues, it will take up almost 60 to 70 words. है ना? अगर आप emerging issues के बारे में भी लिख दोगे, so it will take up almost 60 to 70 words. I'm just trying to tell you that how you would plan the answer in your mind. Because in internal security, it's not so much about the content. Content सबको आता है. But the thing is about how you write the answer and how you plan it. The second part is that it is talking about a multi-layered approach as well. A multi-layered strategy to deal with Naxalism. So that itself should also, roundabout, in my opinion, take at least 70 to 100 words. Now, if that is what is going to be your coverage of these two specific issues, that means that you are just left with 70, 80 words now with your introduction and conclusion. Even if you are writing like a 30-word conclusion, which basically means that you are just left with now 30 to 40 words in your introduction. So first you explain what is Naxalism, history of, see, that's what a lot of people will do. They will start with what is Naxalism. They will start with history of Naxalism as if the question is asking what do you understand by Naxalism. That is not the question. They will start with telling about the entire history of CPI Maoists. They will start with Naxalbari. That is not the question. You have to understand that. हमें वो नहीं लिखना है जो हमें आता है. हमें वो लिखना है जो examiner ने पूछा है. Therefore, in your introduction itself, your introduction should cover the social, economic and the developmental causes for the rise of Naxalism. And you should also talk about how this has led into a violent movement. Now see, if you have to write all of this, ये अपने अंदर ही एक क्वेश्चन है. ये लिखने में ही आपको कम से कम नहीं तो 150 वर्ड चाहिए अगर ये पूरी चीज लिखनी है तो, ढंग से एक्सप्लेन करनी है तो. Then what is the effective way to write this? In my opinion, you could have started by just talking about that how Naxalism, due to a number of causes, has become a violent movement that started from one district and today covers almost 90 districts, but at one point of time, it covered almost 200 districts of India. So you could basically give a brief history of Naxalism and its evolution in India in the introduction instead of writing all of this. And where and how will you write the social, economic, and developmental causes? You can make a diagram. See, that's the way you need to use the diagram. Some people force fit diagrams into their answer. That is not the objective of drawing diagrams. Objective of drawing diagrams is to help you write an answer within the word limit and still be able to write a comprehensive answer. That is what is the objective of drawing the diagram. So what you could have done in the introduction to this question is, you could have talked about evolution of Naxalism in India in terms of its extent and how from Naxalbari this particular movement has spread to, let us say, 200 odd districts by the year 2009. And the reason, so you could have written that the evolution of Naxalism started from Naxalbari as an agrarian movement, but today it has become a significant law and order problem, due to which thousands of lives of civilians and security forces have been lost across the country. And today this problem covers almost 200 districts of the country. By 2009, this problem was almost covering 200 districts of the country in an area called as the Red Corridor. There are various reasons of, or various causes for rise of Naxalism, which have been listed below, and then, or which have been shown in the diagram given below. And then you could have just drawn a diagram. You could have drawn a diagram, causes for Naxalism, and then you could have taken up 3 dimensions and you could have mentioned some of the causes in short in the diagram. For example, here you could have mentioned about social dimension. You could have mentioned about lack of access to social justice. You could have talked about caste-based discrimination. That has been the cause for rise of Naxalism, let's say in Bihar. For example, Bihar. Right? You could have talked about exploitation of farmers by landlords. For example, बंगाल. देखिए यही तरीका है, अगर आपको शॉर्ट के अंदर ये चीजें कवर भी करनी है और आपको उस पर्टिकुलर टॉपिक के अंदर, इस आंसर के अंदर वर्ड लिमिट भी एक्सीड नहीं करनी है. सिमिलरली, with respect to the economic causes for the rise of Naxalism, you could have mentioned about how the Naxal affected districts are most backward districts of India. And you could have mentioned, for example, as, or source could have been mentioned as the Niti Aayog Aspirational Districts Program. Aspirational Districts Program में जो 90% districts हैं वो वही हैं जो कि Naxal affected districts हैं. ठीक है. Similarly, you could have mentioned about that these districts are also having poor physical infrastructure. So you could have mentioned, for example, in several parts of Bastar, no road connectivity. ठीक है, इतना भी लिख दिया तो बहुत है. देखिए सारी चीजें एक्सप्लेन करने, अब इसमें लिखने को तो हम 50 चीजें डिस्कस करते हैं, है ना. दैट the causes for rise of Naxalism, economic are because these areas do not have any educational facilities. There are no employment opportunities which are available in these areas. These areas have been completely cut off from rest of the country. So as a result of that, for the Naxalites to establish their presence in these areas has become much easier. Because of absence of any government machinery in these areas, Naxalites have become de facto government of these areas, etc. and so on and so forth. So वो सब चीजें आप लिख सकते हैं. Developmental causes में भी आप वही सब उस तरीके से उसको express कर सकते हैं. That these areas have not been developed physically, कोई infrastructure नहीं है, right? You could give example of, let's say, Kala Handi, where people were forced to eat rats, literally rodents, because they don't have access to any food. Excessively corrupt machinery, government machinery, which has not delivered the goods to the citizens. So as a result of that, there is a disgruntlement against the state. So you could mention this in form of a diagram is what I can think of the best. इसके अलावा देखिए, आप अगर कुछ भी और करने जाएंगे तो एक तो वर्ड लिमिट एक्सीड होगी और दूसरा टाइम लिमिट भी एक्सीड होगी, और तीसरा अगर आप नहीं लिखेंगे इसको, देन ऑल्सो एग्जामिनर में थिंक कि यार कॉजेज नहीं बताए इसने, राइट? सो देयरफॉर the best way, in my opinion, to write the introduction to this answer could have been something like this. Once you have mentioned that, then it is saying, if you come back to the question, that in this context, discuss the emerging issues and suggest multi-layered strategy to tackle this problem. So first and foremost, we should also know about what are the emerging issues with respect to Naxalism. I have noted, अच्छा देखिए एक चीज और कर सकते हैं कुछ लोग, अगर और वैल्यू ऐड करनी है आंसर में, एक इंडिया का मैप बना दीजिएगा रफली, and you could just show which is that area of the country which is affected by Naxalism, and you could label it as red corridor. See देखिए, innovation का पूरा scope है एग्जाम के अंदर, डिपेंड्स अपॉन हाउ वेल यू आर प्रिपेयर्ड, है ना? अगर आपको मैप बनाने में ही 5 मिनट लग जा रहे हैं, आप 5 बार उसको मिटा के फिर से बना रहे हैं, तो उससे अच्छा तो मत बनाइएगा मैप. बट यू हैव टू प्रैक्टिस ऑल दीज थिंग्स बिफोर, है ना? ये एग्जाम के अंदर जाके जो है आप तिगड़मबाजी नहीं दिखा सकते कि वहां पे एग्जाम के अंदर मैं जो है डायग्राम बनाना शुरू कर दूं. दैट कैन नॉट हैपन देयर. नाउ सिमिलरली, now, what are the emerging issues with respect to Naxalism in India? See, first and foremost, many Naxalite groups today are involved in organized crimes. So there is a comprehensive linkage which has developed between organized crimes and Naxal groups today. Many of their funds are coming through organized crime, cannabis cultivation, or whether it is the smuggling of the artifacts, or whether it is extortion, and also the smuggling of the minor forest produce such as tendu patta, bamboo leaves, etc., which are being done by the Naxalites. Second is that today they are using advanced technology and advanced explosives. Security forces के पास जो guns नहीं है, उससे ज़्यादा advanced guns हैं, और उससे ज़्यादा advanced explosives और ammunition है आज Naxalites के पास. They have access to drones. They have access to various infrared cameras, etc., which they have either captured from the security forces. They have, जब लूट किया उन्होंने security forces के ऊपर, or when they have been able to get it through various sources of funding, etc., from outside which are supporting the Naxals, right? Then on top of that, today they are involved in guerrilla warfare, and that's what their modus operandi has been forever. But now they have become even far more advanced in their guerrilla warfare. They are hiding amongst the various citizens, etc. Then you could also talk about, again, technological advancement, recruitment of children, recruitment of civilians. They deliberately try to recruit children, women, old people in their cadre so that they can use them as human shields in front of the security forces and save themselves, right? So these are some of the dimensions which you could touch upon as far as the emerging issues of Naxalism is concerned. Again, see, as I told you कि 70-80 वर्ड ही हैं लिखने को, तो ज्यादा मतलब 70-80 भी नहीं है, 40-50 वर्ड में ही लिखना है ये. So it's not that कि आप जितना explanation मैंने यहाँ पे दिया है, you don't need to necessarily go into that detailed explanation, right? Then on top of that, what is the multi-layered strategy? अब देखिए, जैसे मैंने आपको बताया, multi-layered strategy लिखने के multiple तरीके हैं. One, you could start by talking about what are the initiatives that should be taken at the national level, what should be the initiatives that should be taken at the state level, and what should be the initiatives that should be taken at the local level. This could be one of the ways of writing the multi-layered strategy. The other way of writing the multi-layered strategy could be that we need to take steps at the level of the civilian administration and at the level of the security forces, and probably take the help of the civil society organizations as well. That could be another multi-layered approach. It's up to you how you write it. It's your choice. UPSC is giving very open-ended question on this particular matter. But all the initiatives should be known to you. वो पता होना चाहिए आपको कि भाई हमने national level के ऊपर एक समाधान doctrine बनाई 2017 में. At national level, there is a scheme called as Modernization of Police Forces and Security Related Expenditure scheme, which is run by the government of India, where they reimburse expenses to the states which they have spent on the challenges of combating with Naxalism. Similarly, you could talk about creation of special forces at the level of the state. ठीक है, ये state level में लिख सकते हैं आप, जैसे कि Greyhounds बनाया, which has been created by Andhra Pradesh, which was very successful. You could talk about Black Panther of the Chhattisgarh police, right? You could, at national level, you could talk about Cobra Battalion of CRPF, right? Then similarly, Operation Green Hunt, actually this is a name which is given by civil society organization, but again, strengthening of the Central Armed Police Forces, CRPF, taking help of CRPF to augment the capacity of the state police forces to deal with Naxalites, because they can't do it on their own, right? So those kind of examples can be given by you in terms of national level, state level, local level, security related issues, security related steps. Similarly, at developmental measures, again, you can mention a number of things. At national level, aspirational districts program. You could talk about the MG Narega program, again, as a part of the developmental steps that have been taken at the national level. In case of state level initiatives, you could talk about schemes initiated by Andhra Pradesh government for land reforms. You could talk about the PDS scheme, the Indira Amma Yojana that was introduced by the Andhra Pradesh government in order to deal with Naxalism in Andhra Pradesh, and they were very successful. You could talk about some of the skill development schemes introduced by Chhattisgarh government, Chulo Asman, Nai Pehel, etc. Roshni scheme. These could be some examples that can be given at the state level. So there are numerous examples. आप कोई भी basic material, किसी भी टेक्स्ट बुक को किसी भी कहीं से भी आप पढ़ेंगे, नक्सलिज्म पे बहुत मिल जाएगा. द पॉइंट इज दैट हाउ यू राइट इट. ओके, अगर आप एग्जाम में सीधा लॉ एंड ऑर्डर और डेवलपमेंटल अप्रोच लिख के आ जाएंगे, इट मे नॉट फेच यू मार्क्स. सो यू हैव टू बी अवेयर व्हेन इट इज सेइंग मल्टी लेयर्ड अप्रोच व्हाट नीड्स टू बी डन. एंड कंक्लूजन में क्या लिख सकते हैं? कंक्लूजन में यू मे टॉक अबाउट दैट व्हाट आर सम ऑफ द challenges that we are facing today as far as combating Naxalism is concerned. There is lack of interstate and center and state coordination. There is lack of civilian administration and police administration's coordination. The capacity of the state police forces is not enough to deal with Naxalism on their own, right? So ऐसे दो तीन challenges आप लिख के बात कर सकते हो कि, but at the same time there are a number of challenges that exist to deal with Naxalism and they need to be dealt with urgently, और ऐसा कुछ लिख सकते हो. या फिर आप कुछ और फॉरवर्ड लुकिंग स्टेप और कुछ बता सकते हो, that in future we need to introduce some steps to improve the coordination between center and states, to improve the coordination between civilian administration and the police administration to deal with Naxalism. So depending upon how you want to write the answer, but broadly this is what we need to understand. देखिए, मल्टी लेयर्ड अप्रोच में आप बहुत सारे तरीके से और भी लिख सकते हो. आप ये भी लिख सकते हो, what are the steps that we need to take on law and order front? What are the steps that we need to take on developmental front? What are the steps that we need to take on the communication strategy front? How to overcome the propaganda of the Naxalites? What are the steps that we need to take in order to curb the funding of the Naxalites? So that could be the fourth layer. Depends on how you look at it. आप किस तरीके से इसको आंसर करना चाहते हैं, वो आपको ओपन एंडेड दे रहा है ये क्वेश्चन. ठीक है? So this is the way you should have written the answer to this particular question. No fixed way as such, but broadly these aspects should have been covered in every answer, which is expecting, let us say, 7.5, 8 out of 15. If you want to secure, then you have to write an answer like. You may even end up securing 10 also, by the way. Let me tell you. You know, if you write a really good answer, which is covering all the dimensions properly, UPSC may end up giving you 10 marks as well out of 15. So you never know. Okay. So this is the first question. Now let's quickly move on to the second question. Now, the second question was from the topic of cyber security. Again, in my opinion, you know, largely a very simple question. What are the topics from where you can prepare cyber security? One is newspapers, most important source. And second is, if you want to read some basic source, then there is an IDSA report on cyber security. There is an ORF report also on cyber security. You just need to go and search on the internet and you will find these reports. So you can read these things from there. Plus, National Cyber Security of Policy 2013 is also a very good document to understand the issues associated with cyber security in India. Now, what was the question? The question was, what are the different elements of cyber security? And then it says, keeping in view the challenges in cyber security, examine the extent to which India has successfully developed a national comprehensive cyber security strategy. So, point is, it is saying that first and foremost, what are elements of cyber security? Second, considering the fact that what are challenges with respect to cyber security, how far does India's strategy to deal with cyber security measures addresses those challenges? Are you understanding? First, you have to talk about elements of cyber security. What are the basic components of cyber security which we need to focus on? And secondly, you need to be talking about challenges of cyber security and how India's strategy to deal with cyber security addresses those challenges, or how it fails short of addressing those challenges. That is what is the question is expecting from you. Now, first let's talk about the different elements of the cyber security strategy in India. Okay. So what are the elements of, what are the elements of cyber security in the first place? First and foremost, in the introduction, you may begin by discussing what is the definition of cyber security. Okay, so इससे पहले आप definition of cyber security से begin कर सकते हैं for giving the introduction. Now, what is the definition of cyber security? Definition of cyber security is that the protection of data, network, and computer devices. So there are three elements as such of cyber security, if as a definition, if we look at it. Protection of three things: protection of data, protection of devices, and protection of networks. All these three things from what? From unauthorized access. Use, disclosure, disruption, destruction, modification, etc. And let me tell you, this definition of cyber security which I am stating is not my own. This is a definition which you can find in the Information Technology Act of 2000. IT Act of 2000 में ये exact definition दी हुई है cyber security की. So first you may begin by stating this. What is the definition of cyber security broadly? Then you may talk about elements of cyber security. Elements क्या हैं? देखिए, one element of cyber security is laws. You need to have laws in place to deal with cyber security. For example, you could give an example here. The IT Act of 2000 is a law. There are certain provisions in the IT Act. You could maybe talk about, say for example, Section 66F of the IT Act that talks about cyber terrorism. You could talk about Section 66D of the IT Act, Section 66E of the IT Act. IT Act के थोड़े basic provisions आपको पता होने जरूरी हैं cyber security का topic prepare कर रहे हैं तो. Then you could talk about data protection bill. That is also an element of cyber security. देखिए, सबसे पहले तो एक लॉ होनी जरूरी है ना, डेटा प्रोटेक्शन लॉ. सो यू कुड मेंशन अबाउट डेटा प्रोटेक्शन बिल, यू कुड मेंशन अबाउट GDPR ऑफ यूरोपियन यूनियन. देन अपार्ट फ्रॉम लॉज, you need to have institutions in place, which is another element of cyber security. So India में हमने क्या बनाया हुआ है, जैसे NCIIPC is there for protection of critical infrastructure. We have CERT-in, which is a body that is supposed to provide response in case of the cyber security or cyber security threats, right? You could perhaps be mentioning about Cyber Swachhta Kendra, right? You could be talking about the IC4, the Indian Cyber Crime Coordination Center. So these are some of the institutions that you could be talking about. Then the third and the very important element of cyber security is manpower, right? Manpower. So that is that you train individuals, cyber security professionals. So for example, we have introduced various courses in India to deal with the cyber security and data protection issues in various law universities. Some of the IITs, etc. courses have been introduced to train people in cyber forensics, to train people in cyber laws, to train people in various methods of trying to overcome the hackers, etc. and all of that. So you could give examples of elements of cyber security. क्या है? Law है, institutions होने चाहिए और manpower होनी चाहिए. ये तीन major components हैं cyber security के, है ना? Upgradation of capacity, capability of the manpower, and then creation of institutions to provide a response in case of any cyber security breaches, and laws that should be there in place in order to overcome this, right? So this is what we need to understand by the various elements of cyber security. Then the next part of the question, if you look at it, is saying that examine the extent to which India has successfully developed comprehensive national cyber security strategy, keeping in mind the cyber security challenges that India faces today. So we should first highlight what are the cyber security challenges that India faces today. Once you have discussed about the elements of the cyber security strategy, what are the challenges? First and foremost is lack of awareness amongst the citizens, government officials with respect to cyber security. आप देख रहे हैं आजकल कितना ऐड कर रहा है गवर्नमेंट, गूगल के साथ, व्हाट्सएप के साथ, 2 फैक्टर ऑथेंटिकेशन के बारे में बता रहा है. जो कोई ऐसे सस्पिशियस लिंक्स हैं उन पे मत क्लिक कीजिए, कॉल्स आ रही हैं, एड्स आ रहे हैं, बिल बोर्ड्स लगे हुए हैं. ऑल ऑफ दिस इज द प्रोसेस ऑफ क्रिएटिंग अवेयरनेस इन इंडिया. सेकेंडली, lack of adequately trained workforce. We do not have enough number of cyber security professionals in this country. Cyber security forensic professionals are very few in this country today. Very few people understand cyber laws in India. Then another challenge is that we have not invested enough in terms of our research and developmental capacity to improve our capacity to deal with cyber security threats. See, China has created a complete army of cyber security professionals, which they call as the cyber warriors. What are we doing? We are creating trolls on the internet, right? So point I'm trying to make is that there are certain challenges. If we have to compete with countries such as China, US, Russia, look at how the Russians sabotaged the various websites of Ukraine during this entire war, and then how some of the other hackers sabotaged the websites of Russia as well. So today, war is no longer being fought on ground between countries, because to get into a war is a very expensive proposition. Let me tell you, cyber security threats can be one of the best ways to cause the maximum damage to your adversary country with minimum possible investment, right? Then lack of coordination between different agencies. There are too many agencies in India. State police के बीच में coordination, cyber crime हो जाए तो it becomes a major difficulty. CERTIN is there, IC4 is there, NCIIPC is there with overlapping mandates. So we don't really know how to overcome those challenges. Then imported telecom equipment. India imports around 70% of telecom equipment. We are dependent on other countries. अब जाके हम iPhone 14 हम बोल रहे हैं जी हम यहाँ पे manufacture करेंगे. The point I'm trying to make is that we are dependent on China, we are dependent on Taiwan, we are dependent on the other countries of the world for our telecom equipment. If you are dependent on other countries, then those countries, if they infest your devices with bugs, what will you do, right? Then data privacy, absence of comprehensive data protection law in India, and over dependence of the government agencies on the external servers, lack of capacity of the private sector to deal with cyber security challenges on their own, etc. These are some of the challenges with respect to cyber security that exist in India. Now, question is asking that how far has India's cyber security strategy been able to overcome these challenges? Examine the utility or examine the impact or examine how much it has been able to solve these challenges is what we need to address. So the next part of the question, and see, इसमें आप बीच में कुछ ये numbers भी फेंक सकते हैं कि cyber security इंडिया के लिए इतना important है क्यों? We are third largest internet user population in the world, second largest number of smartphones in the world. We have introduced schemes such as Aadhaar, with it there is a lot of data of the citizens that can be put to misuse for causing crimes in the society. Then we are one of the most vulnerable countries also when it comes to cyber threats. As per a report published by Symantec, they stated that India ranks in top 3 countries when it comes to spam generation as well as with respect to malicious links floating on the Indian websites. भाई आप और तो सब बात छोड़िए, Prime Minister's Twitter account got hacked. So you can imagine how safe we are right now in terms of cyber security measures, right? The website of Ministry of Defense got hacked for a few moments, but it did get hacked. So that NIC server got hacked. NIC, the organization which is supposed to make websites, email IDs, maintain the data for the government, it itself got hacked. तो आप सोच सकते हैं कि साइबर सिक्योरिटी में हम कितना पीछे हैं अभी. And there is still a lot which is supposed to be done. Now, how far has India's strategy helped in overcoming this? तो पहले positives लिखेंगे कुछ. You can write down some examples. For example, you could mention about the IT Act of 2000, how that has introduced several changes and provisions. 2008 में IT Act में कुछ changes लाए गए. An amendment was made to the IT Act in the year 2008. As a result of it, various provisions were added into the IT Act to deal with the various issues associated with cybersecurity. You could mention about the fact that we have drafted our Data Protection Bill 2021 already, on which a comprehensive report was submitted by the Joint Parliamentary Committee. And now we have even withdrawn that bill from the Parliament, but very soon we can expect a data protection law also in the country to put stringent standards and provisions in place to protect the data of the individuals from misuse by those agencies which have been given that particular data. You may talk about the enactment of the IT intermediary guidelines. Last year, अभी government ने फिर revise कर दी वो. पहले वो intermediary guidelines थी, and now there are IT rules, guidelines that have been placed for the significant social media intermediaries and social media intermediaries. This was all over the news. आप कहीं पे भी जाके newspaper में पढ़ेंगे पिछले 1-2 साल में, you will find it everywhere. You know, social media guidelines which were released by the government for the regulation of the OTT platforms, for the regulation of the social media websites, etc. So all of these things you can mention about. Then apart from that, the National Cyber Security Policy of 2013, which was a comprehensive policy released by the government of India, which laid down various goals of India's cybersecurity policy. Then you could mention about certain institutional steps that have been taken by us as a part of our strategy. We have set up certain sectoral certs, National Critical Information Infrastructure Protection Center, etc. and all of those things. You could mention those things. आप international level पे भी कह सकते हो that we are trying to push for a globally accepted treaty which will be accepted by all the countries of the world, so that the cyber crimes can be dealt with sternly. So, but these are some of the positives that you can talk about, that how far we have succeeded in taking care of the challenges which are associated with cyber security. And इसको important ये है, जो challenges आप लिख रहे हैं जिन heads के अंदर, उनको इससे relate करना जरूरी है. अगर दोनों में disconnect होगा तो फिर answer जो है वो comprehensive नहीं होगा. And then you have to talk about some of the shortcomings in our approach as well. Right? What are the shortcomings in our approach? So what are the shortcomings, and how India's policy or strategy to deal with the issue of cyber security has been a failure to a certain extent. One, for example, you could talk about the IT Act is outdated. We have not amended the IT Act in India for a very long time, and newer crimes are emerging in cyberspace. We don't have provisions in law to deal with them. For example, I am sure that most of you have heard about ransomwares. There is no provision in the IT Act which specifically deals with the issue of ransomware. Right? WannaCry ransomware, PTR ransomware, all of these things. Then secondly, you could talk about shortage of workforce. You may, for example, talk about that how the National Cyber Security Policy of 2013 stated that we will train 3 lakh or 5 lakh trained professionals in next 5 years in the area of cyber security. The reality is that we have not even trained 50,000. Right? So we have fallen short of that. Third, you could probably be talking about that there is lack of coordination. हमने institutions तो बहुत सारे बना दिए, but अभी भी lack of coordination है between various agencies. Right? Then another issue that you may talk about can be the lack of participation of private sector. Private sector has not participated enough in enhancing their cyber security, and as a result of that, our cyber security efforts remain to be weak as a result of that. Right? So इस तरीके के आप एग्जाम्पल्स दे सकते हैं of what are the problems that exist in dealing with cyber security. एक और आप इसमें कह सकते हैं कि भाई हमने लॉज तो ले आए, पर उन लॉज को इंप्लीमेंट करने के लिए इफेक्टिव एनफोर्समेंट कैपेसिटी नहीं है हमारी. वी डोंट हैव capability, we lack capability at the state level for the effective enforcement of laws. Right? State departments do not really have enough capability to deal with the issues of cyber security etc. तो we have not done enough on that. तो ये आप लिखते हुए कुछ way forward के अंदर suggestions देके you can wrap up the answer. Right? So very again a longish kind of a question, 250 words. उसने जो सब कुछ हो सकता था वो पूछ लिया almost cyber security में. But again you will see questions are largely broad in nature. वो बहुत ज्यादा घुस के नहीं पूछ रहा है किसी चीज में, और क्वेश्चन जो है वो वही है जो पहले भी थे. सो इफ आई शो इट टू यू in the past as well, the kind of questions that have been asked by UPSC related to this particular topic. देखिए मैंने recommendations वगैरह भी यहाँ पे mention की हुई हैं. These are some of the recommendations. Way ahead में आप ये चीजें लिख सकते हैं कुछ. These were recommendations that were provided by the expert committees, the Rao Inderjeet committee and Gulshan Rai committee. Right? For example, they stated that every district in India should have a cyber crime cell. For example, they stated that we need to train more manpower in order to enhance the capacity of the cyber security in India. We should create a separate agency to deal with data breaches. So National Data Protection Authority, which will now be created under Data Protection Act, will be, or Data Protection Bill, once it becomes an act, will be a body which will be there for that purpose. तो दो तीन ऐसे कुछ चीजें जो हैं आप अपने conclusion में mention कर सकते हैं, right? In order to wrap up your answer. Now, if you look at the questions that have been asked, discuss the type of cyber crimes and measures required to be taken to strengthen the menace. What is Cyber Dome project? How can it be useful in controlling internet crimes? Data security has assumed significant importance in digitized world due to rising cyber security crimes. And numerous other questions. हर साल एक question cyber security पे आना तय है. It is that 101% going to be asked on cyber security, so you better be prepared with this topic properly and keep a close eye on whatever is being discussed in the newspapers. I unfortunately, due to paucity of time, could not get you links to some of the newspaper articles, but if you just go and search on the internet, देखिए बहुत simple तरीका है इंटरनेट पे सर्च करने का, है ना. आपको गूगल सर्च यूज करना आना चाहिए एज अ यूपीएससी सिविल सर्विस एस्पिरेंट. अगर आप जाके ये सर्च करें ना, साइबर सिक्योरिटी, सपोज कीजिए मेरे को साइबर सिक्योरिटी चैलेंजेस पता करने हैं इंडिया के, यू मे जस्ट सर्च साइबर सिक्योरिटी चैलेंजेस स्पेस साइट thehindu.com. ठीक है, hindu.com पे जितने भी आपके आर्टिकल्स होंगे ना साइबर सिक्योरिटी चैलेंजेस, जहां पे भी ये कीवर्ड्स हैं, वो सारे आपकी गूगल स्क्रीन पे आ जाएंगे. बेसिक सर्च करना आना चाहिए आपको इंटरनेट पे. indianexpress.com you will find all, but आना चाहिए, ये करना है ना. अब ये आपको मेहनत करनी पड़ेगी. No one else is going to do it for you. Now let's quickly move on to the next question. This one was with respect to the security management in the border areas, and this time UPSC asked a question on maritime border security. For this again the source could be ORF की website पे maritime challenges और बॉर्डर सिक्योरिटी को लेकर एक रिपोर्ट पड़ी है. यू कैन रेफर दैट. IDSA की एक रिपोर्ट है बहुत अच्छी खासी ऑन द इशू ऑफ बॉर्डर मैनेजमेंट इन इंडिया एंड बॉर्डर सिक्योरिटी इन इंडिया. प्लस देयर इज अ रिपोर्ट ऑफ मिनिस्ट्री ऑफ होम अफेयर्स एज वेल ऑन बॉर्डर मैनेजमेंट. So you can search all these links on the internet and you will be able to get access to these things, and of course newspapers. So this year a question has been asked with respect to maritime security. I can tell you that I was expecting this question for some years now. Surprisingly, UPSC had not asked a question on this topic earlier, but now that the question has been asked, so let's discuss that. So question is, what are the maritime security challenges in India? Discuss the organizational, procedural and technical initiatives taken to improve the maritime security. अब देखिए इस क्वेश्चन के अंदर 150 वर्ड में लिखना है आंसर आपको. You don't have a lot of scope to beat around the bush, because even if you end up writing the maritime security challenges, मैं बोलता हूं 5 भी लिखे और एक एक के ऊपर आपने 10 से 12 वर्ड भी लिखा तो 60-70 वर्ड्स आर गॉन देयर. 50-60 तो मिनिमम गया. अगर आपने इनिशिएटिव्स लिख दिए, ऑर्गेनाइजेशनल 2 लिख दिए, टेक्निकल 2 लिख दिए, प्रोसीजरल 2 लिख दिए, 6 ये हो गए. 6 into 10 again 60, 120 gone. What are you left with? 30 words to write the introduction and the conclusion. So there is no scope of beating around the bush unnecessarily in this question, let me tell you that. So you should first simply talk about कंसिडरिंग, मेरा इंट्रोडक्शन अगर मैं लिखता इस आंसर का, तो मैं लिखता कंसिडरिंग द लेंथ ऑफ इंडियाज मेरीटाइम बॉर्डर्स and its importance in India's economy, it is important to pay attention to maritime security challenges which are as follows. और फिर मैं उसके बाद maritime security challenges सीधा नीचे लिख देता, राइट? और ज्यादा होता तो मैं एक डायग्राम बना देता छोटा सा कोस्टल इंडिया का, and I could have shown what are the kinds of threat that exist on the maritime borders of India. I could have shown, for example, piracy on the east coast of India, closer to the Gulf of Aden, right? Then I could have shown the issues associated with the increasing presence of the Chinese in the South Indian Ocean, in the Indian Ocean region, right? In Bay of Bengal, in through partnership with Bangladesh and Burma and Thailand, etc. I could have mentioned, I could have probably drawn, about the issue of terrorism, 26/11 attacks. I could have shown Bombay, and I could have shown 26/11 attacks. So it's your innovation, but the point is, within that limited time, how do you impress the examiner by telling him कि मेरे को आता सब कुछ है, पर आपने मेरे को समय इतना कम दिया है सर कि मुझे कम समय में तो ऐसे ही लिखना आता है, राइट? वो आपको सीखना जरूरी है. So what are the maritime security challenges? Without wasting many more time. So what are the challenges? See, first and foremost, there are certain traditional challenges and non-traditional challenges. Traditional challenges are, for example, sudden political, economic and military events, है ना? 1971 war, 1999 Kargil. How with the help of our with the help of our navy prowess, we were able to block the Karachi port and therefore create significant pressure on Pakistan in 1999. 71, the American ships had moved very close to the Indian coast to create pressure on India to withdraw from Bangladesh. Right? So that is one threat which we face. Second is the increasing presence of the Chinese in the Indian Ocean region, which is our area of influence, and the Chinese are establishing Hamban Tota, है ना? बिल्कुल relevant example है एकदम current affairs का, वो लिखना जरूरी है. श्रीलंका, right? How the Chinese have established themselves through a military port today in Hamban. पहले उन्होंने बोला जी इकोनॉमिक डेवलपमेंट, पोर्ट डेवलप कर रहे हैं, फिर धीरे धीरे करते करते अपनी नेवी लेकर आए, अब पूरा उसको मिलिटराइज कर दिया उन्होंने. इट इज अ मेजर कंसर्न टू इंडिया बिकॉज 75% of our trade with the rest of the world doesn't take place through air, sir, or doesn't take place through road transport. It takes place through sea, and therefore if our trade gets affected, our economy will get affected. Our economy gets affected, our security will get affected. So therefore, to maintain sea lanes of communication open, it's very important that we focus on the maritime issues. So again, rise in regional tensions, instability in area of maritime interest, right? You could mention about all of those things. Then what are non-traditional threats that have emerged as far as, non-traditional threats as far as maritime security is concerned? First is maritime terrorism. Today, you could give example of 26/11 attacks, that how the various non-state and state actors are trying to cause a threat to India's internal security through the sea route. Then you could give example of piracy and armed robbery at the sea. This is something which is known to all of us, especially of the Gulf of the coast of Somalia, etc. And वहां से हमारा major oil आ रहा है. Most of our oil is coming from the Persian Gulf, right? Gulf से आ रहा है, and that is exactly where the pirates are sitting. So again, creating a threat to India's maritime security. Then you could talk about trafficking, smuggling on the maritime borders of India, which is causing significant economic damage to the country, which is causing a lot of damage in terms of the other internal security aspects as well. Then you could mention about illegal, unreported and unregulated fishing as well, which is taking place in the Indian Ocean region by the poachers, which is a major threat not only to the ecology but also to the economic well-being of our own fishermen, right? So these are some of the challenges which you could mention. Examples दीजिएगा, जैसे आप illegal फिशिंग के बारे में बात करें तो श्रीलंका वाला एग्जाम्पल दीजिए, है ना? देन यू कुड टॉक अबाउट पायरेसी के बारे में बात करें तो सोमालिया का एग्जाम्पल दीजिए, एंड ऑल ऑफ दोस थिंग्स. देन द नेक्स्ट इज दैट व्हाट आर द स्टेप्स दैट शुड बी टेकन, राइट? सो दैट्स वेरी सिंपल. अब वो देखिए 3 तरीके के स्टेप्स बोल रहा है आपको. प्रोसीजरल, देन इट इज टॉकिंग अबाउट ऑर्गेनाइजेशनल एंड टेक्निकल। पहले हम ऑर्गेनाइजेशनल स्टेप्स की बात कर लेते हैं। We have created a 3-tier coastal architecture for the security of our coastal areas, which includes the Navy, the State Marine Police Force, and the Indian Coast Guard. Right? You could talk about coastal security scheme also here. Then we have appointed a National Maritime Security Coordinator, right? Who is supposed to be the coordinating agencies between all these three forces which are guarding our coastal borders. You could mention about setting up a multi-agency maritime security group as well. Organizational steps. As far as technical steps are concerned, we have improved surveillance on the border, on the maritime borders, by installation of the various automated identification system. We have made most of the boats which are used by the fishermen either enabled by an RFID tag, so that we can easily identify which ship belongs to us, which fishing vessel belongs to us and to the other country. And also entry and exit from the various minor and major ports in India have been made dependent on the basis of a license. हर शिप, हर जो एक बोट होती है उसको लाइसेंस नंबर दिया जाता है, रजिस्ट्रेशन जरूरी है, otherwise you cannot venture into the sea for your fishing purposes. Then other technical steps, setting up of the National Command and Control Communication Intelligence Network, etc. and all of that. And then you could talk about procedural steps as well. Procedural mein, you could perhaps be mentioning about that we have improved the we have enhanced the surveillance in the in the coastal areas by providing ID to all the fishermen, uniform licensing of fishing boats, GPS tracking. We are trying to regulate more and more the activities that are taking place in the coastal areas. And then maritime exercises with other countries, Milan exercises and so many other exercises, Simpex, and all of these exercises that you keep reading about in the newspapers can be mentioned as examples on procedural steps. और जब आपने ये mention कर दिया तो आप end में आप ये mention कर सकते हैं, despite these there are some challenges. Again, state center coordination problems. Capability of state marine police forces is not enough to deal with the problems of the maritime security challenges. इस तरीके के कुछ challenges आप mention करते हुए you can conclude the answer, or you may give some forward looking recommendations as well. Okay, so again, very simple question, and in fact there were number of newspaper articles on maritime security in the last 1.5 years, so you could have used those in order to enrich your content. Okay, now let's look at the last question. And see, again आप देखोगे ना questions जो कि इस topic पे पूछे जाते हैं, बहुत सारे क्वेश्चंस पूछे गए हैं, बट आज तक मेरी टाइम सिक्योरिटी पे केवल एक क्वेश्चन आया था, और वो भी बहुत एब्सर्ड क्वेश्चन आया था, वो भी 2015 में. Since last 7 years there was no question that was asked on maritime security, and this year they ended up asking one question on that. Now anyway, so let's move on to the last topic. The topic was linkages of organized crime with terrorism, and this question, what are the topics, what are the sources that you can refer for the preparation of this particular topic? One is, you should refer to, there is one research paper by a gentleman called as Madan Lal. You can search it on the Google and you will find he has written one of the best research papers on this. PDF के फॉर्म में मिल जाएगा आपको Google के ऊपर, where he has talked about what is organized crime, examples of organized crime, this, that, and so many other things. And then of course newspapers. Now, what was the question? Discuss the types of organized crimes. बहुत ही simple question. पहले आपको ऑर्गेनाइज्ड क्राइम डिफाइन करना है और टाइप्स ऑफ ऑर्गेनाइज्ड क्राइम के एग्जांपल्स देने हैं, एंड देन डिस्क्राइब द लिंकेजेस बिटवीन टेररिस्ट एंड ऑर्गेनाइज्ड क्राइम दैट एग्जिस्ट इन नेशनल एंड इंटरनेशनल लेवल. दैट इज इट, और कुछ नहीं है इस क्वेश्चन में. नाउ फर्स्ट एंड फॉरमोस्ट, व्हाट इज ऑर्गेनाइज्ड क्राइम? व्हेन यू परस्यू क्राइम एज एन बिजनेस एक्टिविटी, as a commercial activity, that is what is called as organized crime. So when your intention of performing a crime is not greed as such, or is not hatred, or is not to take revenge from someone, but rather your objective of committing a crime is purely to earn money, then it is called as organized crime. But organized crime is not performed by an individual alone. Usually it is performed in an organized manner by a group of individuals, those who are acting like an organization, जिसको कहते हैं गिरोह या गैंग है उन लोगों का, right? So, and within the organization, different people would have different expertise. Okay, so that's what we need to understand by definition of organized crime. अगर आप देखें तो as per Maharashtra Control of Organized Crime Act, this is the definition of the term organized crime. It is any continuing unlawful activity by an individual singly or jointly, either as a member of an organized crime or on behalf of such a group by use of violence or threat of violence or intimidation or coercion, etc., with the objective of gaining monetary benefits or gaining undue economic or undue advantage for himself or for any other person. You may not remember this definition, but what you can mention is organized crime refers to those criminal activities which are performed by a well-trained group of individuals acting like an entity or an organization, जैसे एक company काम करती है, and they perform these crimes purely for economic purposes. Now, let us go into types of organized crimes. You know, there are so many of them. Counterfeiting of currencies, drug trafficking, human trafficking, trafficking of the artifacts, trafficking in the your endangered animals, frauds, internet frauds, cyber frauds that are taking place today are done by organized criminal groups. Drug production, trafficking, distribution, right? Trafficking of firearms, sports corruption, all of these. If you look at some of the figures, organized crime is a huge industry, globally huge, right? For example, counterfeiting of currency notes is almost 1.13 trillion in terms of the size of the counterfeiting that is taking place and the money which is coming in because of this. Then drug trafficking, look at the numbers, 652 billion. Some of the countries in the world do not have such GDP as is being generated by some of the organized criminal groups. You could have given one or two examples or names of organized criminal groups as well. This is, for example, one structure of the Dawood Company, D Company, which is an organized criminal group, homegrown organized criminal group based out of South Asia, right? Dawood Ibrahim's group. And this is how an organized criminal group is organized, where each and every individual is supposed to perform a specific function. Leader है, team, मतलब जैसे IT कंपनी होती है ना, team leader है, फिर उसके नीचे project manager है, फिर है ना, everything is there in these company. ये कंपनी की तरह ही काम कर रहे हैं एकदम, है ना. आपने अगर वो मिर्जापुर देखा हो तो उसमें the son goes to the father and he says कि भाई I am working for कालीन भैया. So the father says अच्छा गुंडे के लिए काम करते हो, तो इसे गुंडा मत बोलना, उन्हें डॉन है वो, है ना. So there is a difference between Don and there is a difference between a Gunda, है ना. He says भाई मेरा जो बॉस है डॉन है वो यहाँ का, है ना. So Don is someone who is controlling the entire economy of the region. वो केवल एक छोटा मोटा क्राइम नहीं करता, सब तरीके के क्राइम करते हैं हम, है ना. हर किसी का अलग अलग काम है. किसी का काम केवल शूटर का काम है, एक का आदमी केवल एक्सटॉर्शनिस्ट है, एक आदमी केवल किडनैपर है, एक आदमी का काम केवल जो है ड्रग ट्रैफिकिंग करना है. ये हर किसी का काम डिवाइडेड है, हर किसी के ऊपर टीम लीडर बैठा है. बहुत ऑर्गेनाइज तरीके से ऑर्गेनाइज क्राइम हो रहा है, कंपनीज की तरह ऑपरेट कर रहे हैं वो, राइट. सो एनीवे, सो नाउ द थिंग इज, what once you explain the types of organized crimes and some examples, etc., and all of that, then the next thing is, what is the reason because of which organized criminal groups and the terrorist groups are coming closer to each other? Maybe you can make a mention of that, but I doubt that that scope is there in this particular question. But you should at least know why organized criminal groups and terror groups are coming close to each other today. War on terror that was launched by America after 9/11 attacks made it impossible for terrorist organizations to be funded by the money from the various parts of the world. So they had to look for alternate sources of money. What was the best source of money to get involved in organized crime themselves? Look at Taliban. Taliban says that our objective is to impose Sharia law in Afghanistan and to extend this to the other parts of the world as well. What are they doing? They are involved in illegal drug trafficking in the entire region. Is that their main objective? No. But today, Taliban has gone on to acquire characteristics of an organized criminal group. ISIS. They say that our objective is to establish and restore the caliphate rule across the world. You ask them, what are you doing? Why are you selling oil in the international black market then? Is that what you are supposed to do? ये तो economic activity कर रहे हो. Why? Because ISIS funding has been frozen. Especially Al-Qaeda's funding has been frozen after especially 9/11 attacks, where USA imposed heavy economic sanctions on those countries, on those banks, on those entities that had anything to do with these terror organizations. So naturally their resources dried up. They started looking for other sources. दूसरा एक तरीका क्या है? Organized criminal groups को training provide करो, उनको arms दो, उनको क्रॉस बॉर्डर इन्फिल्ट्रेशन मूवमेंट के अंदर हेल्प करो, वो आपको पैसा देंगे. आप उनको सर्विसेज दो, वो आपको पैसा देंगे. Right? So today, organized criminal groups and terror groups have come very close to each other, and there are examples of that. जब तक आप वो नहीं लिखेंगे, your answer will not be complete. So, first and foremost, what are the types of linkages that exist between organized criminal groups and terror groups? एक होता है सर coexistence. Organized criminal group and terror group coexisting, but not really relating or doing anything with each other. ठीक है, लड़का और लड़की क्लास में आए, दोनों को एक दूसरे पसंद हैं, दोनों को पता है कि हम एक जैसे ही हैं, पर वो फिर भी दूर बैठे हुए हैं, वो एक दूसरे से बातचीत नहीं कर रहे. दूसरा है कोऑपरेशन, कोऑर्डिनेशन. लड़का और लड़की क्लास में आए, उन्होंने बोला भाई तू मेरा नोट्स ले, मैं तेरे नोट्स दूं. दैट इज कोऑर्डिनेशन, कोऑपरेशन, सिम्बायोटिक रिलेशनशिप बिटवीन ऑर्गेनाइज्ड क्रिमिनल ग्रुप्स एंड टेरर ग्रुप्स. टेरर ग्रुप्स आर सेइंग तुम्हें प्रोटेक्शन चाहिए, यू आर क्रिमिनल्स, डोंट वरी, हमारे पास पूरी टेरिटरी है, यहां पे कोई नहीं आता, वी विल प्रोवाइड यू प्रोटेक्शन, तुम हमें आर्म्स दे दो इन रिटर्न. तुम्हें प्रोटेक्शन चाहिए, ठीक है, you give us ammunition to carry out the terror attacks. You want protection, no doubt, you give us logistics, हमें गाड़ी दे देना terror attack करने के लिए. Right? Terror groups on the other hand are telling the organized criminal groups that see boss, you have money, we want money, what will you want in return? You want to move across the border, हम तो रोज ही करते हैं, हमारा तो रोज का काम है. You want to do trafficking, we will help you do that. Right? So there is a symbiotic relationship which has been established between organized criminal groups and terror groups. Naxalites का हमने देखा. See, Naxalites are in close association with the illegal mining mafia in these Naxal affected areas. Why? They provide protection to this illegal mining mafia. Illegal mining mafia sells the product in the market and gives them share. So both the organizations are happy. Northeast, same is happening. Insurgent groups will get into some kind of an arrangement with the contractors. Government contractors will siphon off money from the government schemes, give it to the mining mafia, given to the insurgents. Let's say you are an honest officer. You will tell the contractor, मैं तेरा contract खत्म कर रहा हूं अभी, मेरे को पता चला है तूने ऐसा किया है, siphoning off of money किया है. They will say, अच्छा. Next day, there will be some insurgent which will be at your home and he will threaten you that don't do this to this particular contractor, otherwise you will lose your life and life of your entire family. So what will you do? You will succumb to pressure. So this is the kind of linkage that has got established between organized crime and terror groups today, and this is very sinister. We were not able to deal with one. Now they have become one by joining hands with each other. Multiplier effect कहते हैं इसको, where it has become impossible to deal with these organizations today because one is providing protection to the other and one is helping the other with the sources and resources. Several examples, है ना? 1993 Bombay blast happened as a result of coordination between LET and D Company, Dawood Ibrahim. 2004 attacks took place in Madrid. 2004 में मैड्रिड में टेरर अटैक्स हुए, वहां पे जो लोकल ट्रेन चलती है. लेटर ऑन इट वाज फाउंड कि ये एक्सप्लोजिव आए कहां से. अलकायदा ने बोला हमने किया है टेरर अटैक. आए कहां से? They came to know that the linkage was found with the Eastern European organized criminal groups. They had provided them explosives to Al-Qaeda, right? So there are I've like given this diagram how organized criminal groups and terror groups are associated with each other. You could probably draw something like this in the exam, right? There are number of other things. एक तो ये है cooperation, है ना? Third is confluence. दो जिस्म एक जान. लड़का लड़की क्लास में आए, नोट्स चेंज किए, थोड़े दिन बाद बोला कि आओ हम थोड़ा और अपना रिलेशनशिप जो है उसको और गहरा करें, है ना? दिस इज कॉन्फ्लुएंस. दो जिसमें एक जान. ऑर्गेनाइज क्रिमिनल ग्रुप बिकमिंग अ टेरर ग्रुप एंड टेरर ग्रुप बिकमिंग एन ऑर्गेनाइज क्रिमिनल ग्रुप. आइसिस perfect example. Taliban perfect example. Naxalites perfect example. Objective was political, but today in order to sustain themselves they are now dependent on the various economic activities which are performed by organized criminal groups. So you mention all those things as a part of the linkages, and I have mentioned here Madrid terror bombings consisted of a series of coordinated attacks, and later on it was found that the Al-Qaeda had been able to carry out attacks with the help of the explosives that were sold to these people by some of the hashish trafficking groups in Eastern European countries, right? So that is what you can mention. अब यहाँ पे मैंने कुछ India specific examples भी दिए हुए हैं, Naxal affected areas and all of that. Similarly, Northeast India and all of those things you could mention. And then finally, in your conclusion, you could just mention about some of the steps that have been taken by India to overcome organized crime. by enacting various laws, by creating special crime cells in various state police departments, Makoka, Kakoka, Gujarat Control of Terrorism, Organized Crime Act. UP has introduced a bill in the Legislative Assembly, right? Special crime cells have been set up in different police departments. We have signed extradition treaties with various countries. क्योंकि इसने आपको केवल नेशनल नहीं बोला है ऑर्गेनाइज क्राइम और टेररिज्म के बीच में लिंकेज, तो आप नक्सलिज्म और इंसर्जेंसी का एग्जांपल देंगे नॉर्थ ईस्ट का, but you will have to give example of transnational organizations, Al-Qaeda, Taliban, etc., and all of those things as well, and some of the steps taken. You can wrap up the answer. Okay, lot of content is there, lot of content, but and let me tell you, as I said, there was not a single question which had been asked by UPSC directly on this topic earlier, but now that has been done, right? So the point is that a lot of topics which have not been covered in the past by UPSC may become important this year, considering the fact that no question has been asked on these particular topics earlier. Right. So that's what we need to understand as far as the topic of organized crime and the linkages with terrorism is concerned. Right. So now few things, important things in my opinion, which you should keep in mind for internal security. It's a topic which can be done easily within a week's time. अगर आप ढंग से तैयारी करें 5 से 6 दिन के अंदर आप इंटरनल सिक्योरिटी पूरा खत्म कर सकते हैं और 50 नंबर आपकी जेब में है. इसलिए कह रहा हूं, जो मैंने इनिशियली 2 चीजें बताई थी, क्वेश्चंस बहुत प्रिडिक्टेबल लाइंस पे आते हैं, लार्जली स्टैटिक है ये टॉपिक, बट इसमें करंट अफेयर्स एग्जांपल्स इंक्लूड करने हैं, एंड सेकेंडली क्वेश्चंस आर नोन, so in a way you can save time in those questions and utilize it somewhere else. The only challenge is that there is no specific source that is available in the market. देखिए किताबें वगैरह बहुत सारी अवेलेबल हैं, but I don't recommend any of those books because they are absolutely rubbish in my opinion. That's my personal opinion. They have been written in a very shabby manner. जो भी सारी किताबें लिखी हैं कॉपी पेस्ट करके लोगों ने लिख दिया इधर उधर से. अगर आपको पढ़ना है तो there are lot of material. If you look at our material also, there also, and otherwise और भी बहुत सारा material है, so you can refer that. One is that. And secondly, newspapers अच्छे से पढ़िएगा. अगर genuine sources से पढ़ना है तो I have already told you that there are several reports which are available on the internet. You can refer those. Okay. So this is all about the internal security discussion as far as this year's paper is concerned. Any questions or any doubts that you people have? Yes. Of course, I mean, it is expected if you're quoting some data, then you should tell about the source of the data as well, unless it is a very well-known data point. See, of course, it may happen that you may not necessarily remember the exact data as well, and you may just quote it, but in that there is a danger, okay? If the examiner feels that, you have tried to fudge it, then it may set a wrong impression. Otherwise, it is possible that you can just write it without quoting the source as well. I mean, it's completely your choice. Okay, what else? Not necessarily. I mean, organized crime and terrorism. So, are the questions inspired only from current affairs? No, sir. Organized crime and terrorism is a topic of the syllabus. It has exact topic is linkages between organized crime and terrorism. तो उसने वैसे ही पूछ लिया, है ना? तो ऐसा नहीं है. करंट, इनफैक्ट इंटरनल सिक्योरिटी में सबसे कम इंस्पिरेशन है करंट अफेयर्स का, बिकॉज लार्जली ये स्टैटिक प्रॉब्लम्स हैं. देखिए, नक्सलिज्म का प्रॉब्लम 10 साल पहले भी वही था, आज भी वही है, बट उसमें क्या हो रहा है, थोड़ा बहुत चेंजेस हो रहे हैं हमारी अप्रोच में, इन सिचुएशन एक्सेट्रा, तो उससे वो कभी कभी क्वेश्चन को चेंज हो जाता है और आपका कंटेंट चेंज हो जाता है उसके अकॉर्डिंग. अदरवाइज, एज आई सेड, लार्जली द टॉपिक ऑफ इंटरनल सिक्योरिटी इज वेरी स्टैटिक इन नेचर. जो मैं आज से 4 साल पहले पढ़ा रहा था इंटरनल सिक्योरिटी के लिए, वही लार्जली मैं आज भी पढ़ा रहा हूं, बट उसमें थोड़े बहुत चेंजेस, 10-15% चेंजेस हैव टेकन प्लेस. ठीक है? एनी अदर क्वेश्चंस? Okay, thank you so much and wishing you all the very best for your examination. The other faculty will come in and take the other portions. Okay, thank you.